Jai Hind and welcome back. Today we are going to explore Shukra Niti with a specific focus on diplomacy and defensive war. Our aim is to understand how Shukracharya's ideas connect ethical governance with pragmatic statecraft and how this framework emphasizes conciliation, ethical warfare and dharma-based deterrence. By the end of the session, you should be able to explain who Shukracharya was and why his views matter for statecraft. You will be able to distinguish between Shukraniti and Kautilya's Arthashastra in terms of war and diplomacy. You will be able to identify key principles of diplomacy, defensive warfare, and ethical conduct in war according to Shukraniti. I also hope that you will be able to reflect on the contemporary relevance of these ideas for modern security and foreign policy. Before we start, when you think of an ancient statecraft, which name or text comes first to your mind and why? Our understanding says that most of the students came up with the name of Chanakya or Kautilya. But nobody talks about the Shukracharya and other thinkers who were actually and uh, given this become make this tradition a rich tradition of multiple thoughts and arguments as Indian strategic thought. So let us begin with the figure of Shukracharya himself. In the classical tradition, Shukracharya is remembered as a legendary sage and the preceptor of the Asuras. He is described as the son of sage Bhrigu and belonged to the Bhargava tradition. He is traditionally regarded as the author of Shukraniti, also known as the Shukraniti or Sukraniti Sara. Unlike the popular image of him only as a spiritual or mythological figure, Shukracharya also emerges as a sophisticated thinker on governance and war. His, he is portrayed as an advocate of dharma-centered statecraft where political power is guided and restrained by ethical norms. Many of you will be familiar with the Kautilya, but perhaps less with Shukracharya as a political thinker. Why do you think some texts become central in the political discourse while others remain in the background? So, for this, you need to understand the core philosophy of the Shukraniti or Shukraniti Sara. Now, and for that, we need to move into the core philosophy of Shukraniti. At the heart of uh, this text is the integration of ethical governance and pragmatic statecraft. This means that the ruler is expected to be effective and realistic, but never at the cost of dharma. The king is seen as the guardian of the enforcer of dharma, not merely as a power holder. This is strong emphasis on justice, fairness, and the warfare of subject as the basis of legitimate rule. Second, the diplomacy and negotiation preferred over the use of force. Third is the force viewed as a last resort under condition justified by dharma. You can think of Shukraniti as an attempt to say, yes, the world is tragic and even dangerous, but the response to that world must remain anchored in the ethical responsibility. To place Shukraniti in context, we need to contrast it briefly with the Kautilya's Arthashastra. Shukraniti leans toward defensive statecraft, where peace is priority and decisions are guided by dharma-based ethics. So Shukraniti is about defensive statecraft and uh, where peace and priority and decisions are guided by the dharma-based uh, ethics. The ruler is expected to avoid unnecessary war, to prefer conciliation, and to protect subject under the moral framework. In contrast, the Arthashastra is often associated with the aggressive expansion and realpolitik outlook, and also a power-centered approach. Kautilya's framework accepts deception, subversion, and offensive strategies as normal instrument of statecraft, through still within a broader concern for stability and order. If we imagine a spectrum where Kautilya stands closer to the strategic realism, while Shukraniti stands closer to the normative or dharmic realism, still practical, but with stricter ethical breaks. Let us now look at how Shukraniti treats diplomacy. Diplomacy has primacy. The text highlights several diplomatic strategies. First, strategic alliances with neighboring kingdoms as a core tool of statecraft. Treaties, that is second, treaties and accords as mechanism to prevent conflict and maintain stability. Third, the peaceful negotiation as the first resource, not war. And fourth is intelligence gathering through diplomatic channels. The ruler is advised to, that is also consideration as a primary strategy. The ruler is advised to build harmony and avoid unnecessary conflict through dialogues, use negotiation to resolve dispute rather than rushing into the war, respect the mutual interest of neighboring states, and build long-term trust through consistent diplomatic behavior. In other words, diplomacy is not just talk before war. It is a long-term architecture of relationship that reduces the very likelihood of war. Next is the strategic alliance building. When this diplomatic framework uh, alliance building receives special attention, principal alliance formation become crucial. Alliances should be formed on mutual respect and mutual benefit rather than short-term opportunism. Second is emphasis on long-term relationship over short-term gains. Third is diplomatic network envisioned as part of the broader security architecture. Next is trust and loyalty. It is the foundation of durable alliances. This implies that a state should maintain credibility, honor its commitment, and behave predictably if it wishes to enjoy a reliable partner in times of crisis. In contemporary international relations, what happens when a state repeatedly breaks its promise or abandons allies? How does this fit with the Shukra's stress on trust and loyalty? Let's move forward and we'll discuss the defensive warfare and dharma-based deterrence. Having established diplomacy in the argument before that and alliance building, Shukraniti then turns to the question of war. The overall philosophy is that is related to defense warfare. We also call it defense warfare philosophy. War is a sacred duty only when the defense of the kingdom truly requires it. War is also justified only for the defensive purpose, not for aggression or conquest. The ideal instance is one of preparedness without aggressive intent. The protection of subject remains the primary obligation of the king. The dharma-based deterrence, that is also this lead to directly into the idea of dharma-based uh, deterrence, maintaining a strong military to deter aggression, insisting on a well-trained and disciplined armed forces. There is also requirement of visible strength, which become a tool for preserving peace. The readiness must not turn into provocation. This is similar to modern notion of credible deterrence. You build enough capability and resolve that other think twice before attacking, but you do not consistently threatens or destabilizes them. It is possible to maintain a strong deterrent posture without creating insecurity in neighboring states. What would Shukniti expect a state to do? Uh, Avoid appearing provocative. This is also linked to the ethical warfare principle. Perhaps the most striking contribution of Shukniti is its detailed concern with the ethical warfare. The first set of ethical principles claims that there is need of protection of non-combatants, that is civilians, elderly and children are not to be harmed in any kind of war. You may be thinking that this is similar to the Arthashastra. Yes, the dharmic principle in Indian strategic context or thought was always given a priority, and it was always part of the Indian strategic thought. It is still the part of Indian strategic thinking. Prohibition on killing, surrendering enemies, recognition of right once as enemy has laid down arms. This is also linked to the current Geneva Conventions. Respect for sacred sites and places of worship, that is not to destroy temples, other religious sites when you are fighting a war. Avoiding destruction of crops and water resources, because that is linked to the civilian infrastructure that should also be not to be affected or impacted. These principles constrain the conduct of war in concerned ways, not just in rhetoric. The eco is an ancient context. The modern ideas we associate with international humanitarian law and laws of armed conflict. There are also second set of ethical principles. These are fair combat between warriors of equal standing, disproportionate or treacherous attacks on weaker non-combatants are condemned. There is also declared war with proper notification. Rejecting covert, undeclared or purely treacherous war is also to be avoided as per the argument. Mercy toward defeated and fleeting enemies. That is also one of the principle of Shukraniti. There is also adherence to dharma even in the heat of the conflict. Notice that ethics here are not suspended during war. War is precisely the arena where dharma is most severely tested and yet must still be upheld. How do these principles compare with what we see in many modern conflicts, especially regarding civilians, surrendering troops, and critical infrastructure? Shuknati's vision of warfare and diplomacy is anchored in a particular idea of kingship. The ideal king should be guardian of dharma and protector of subject. He should be central duty ensuring the safety, security, and welfare of citizens. He must balance military readiness with peaceful governance. He should be able to use wisdom and fairness, which highlighted as the essential qualities in all decisions. The king is not only a military leader or administrator, but also a moral agent responsible for aligning state action with dharma. If we translate king into modern political leadership, what would this model accept from today's heads of state or government in matters of war and peace? And there is also smart warfare strategies. Shukranati does not advocate naive pacifism. It speaks of a smart warfare strategy when defense becomes necessary. So, what are the components of smart warfare? The first is combining diplomacy and military strength, especially when defense is necessary. Strategic planning before engagement to ensure objectives are clear and cost minimized. Use of intelligence and espionage as legitimate tools. Next is adaptability based on the circumstances for flexible, context sensitive approach uh, rather than rigid doctrines. This is this think of it as a holistic security approach. First, exhaust diplomatic and conciliatory avenues. If war becomes necessary, fight with clear strategy, accurate intelligence, and adherence to ethical limits. In contemporary military doctrines, what should be what would be the equivalent of Shukra's stress on intelligence, planning, and adaptability? This is also one of the important questions. Finally, how does all this matter today beyond historical interest? Modern applications foundation for defense security. The doctrines are also being discussed here. Shukniti offers a model where the state prepares seriously for war but remain oriented toward peace and defense rather than expansion. The other doctrine is ethical framework for modern conflict resolution. Diplomatic engagement is prioritized over military intervention, and when force is used, it is tightly controlled by moral constraint. Surrendering civilians, uh, surrender sacred sites and essential resources. Next, the another doctrine is balance strengths and restraints. A state must be strong enough to deter aggression, yet restrained enough not to provoke insecurity or commit injustice. In modern term, we also call it balance of power. This balance is central to contemporary debates on deterrence, proportionality, and responsible use of force. If you were to translate Shukniti into a principle for a modern national security policy, what three bullet point would you include? I request you to kindly think on this thing and try to elaborate or understand the modern national security contemporary debate based on the doctrines and discussion and debates and the arguments raised given by the Shukracharya. So, what are the key takeaways? Let me conclude, or to conclude, let us crystallize the key takeaways from Shukraniti's approach to diplomacy and defensive war. So, five core principles which are important as per the this particular text. Diplomacy and conciliation are the primary tools of statecraft. War is not the first option, but the last resort. After dialogue, negotiation, and alliance building have been seriously attempted. Defensive warfare is justified by dharma, not by ambition or expansionism. War is a duty only when it protects the kingdom and its people from unjust aggression. Ethical conduct is required even in conflict. Non-combatants are to be protected. Surrendering enemies are not to be killed. Sacred places are essential resources. Sacred places and essential resources are not to be destroyed, and mercy is to be shown to the defeated. Next is alliance building and diplomatic networks are essential to for collective security that is grounded in the idea of trust and loyalty. Next key takeaway is political leadership must integrate wisdom, fairness, and dharma with strategic realism, maintaining strength without abandoning ethical responsibilities is also also need to be debated and discussed upon. As you reflect on Shukniti, think about how indigenous Indian frameworks of statecraft can enrich contemporary debates on international relations, defense strategy studies, rule of war, and security strategy. In our next section, uh, we can we will be discussing the idea of Sam, Dam, Bhed, and Dand, and will be closing this particular unit by the uh, by the particular argument on these four theoretical understanding. Thank you. Jai Hind.